I initially took this class because it seemed very interesting and insightful to me, and it definitely lived up to those expectations. Overall, I learned a lot, such as the different struggles that racial groups face in this nation that I didn't even know about, such as disenrollment with Native Americans. In addition to that, I also was able to put names to things I saw occurring throughout this nation, but didn't know the name of or the true impact of, such as racial capitalism and the model minority myth. In addition to that, I also learned a lot about current causes and current events that are going on right now, such as the true motives and goals of the Black Lives Matter movement. And but the thing that I learned that was probably the most valuable was my own personal identity and the whole kind of history and evolution of it that I previously hadn't explored before. I personally identify as a Caucasian, but my true biological racial identity is a lot more complicated than that. Like many other people in this nation, it's an amalgamation of different ethnicities that's a result of the melting pot our nation is with different immigrants and ethnic groups existing and coming here. And so overall, my main three ethnicities that make up the biggest parts of my genetic makeup and I know the most about so far are my Italian side, which makes up 25% of my makeup, my Mexican side, which also makes up 25% of my makeup, and my Cherokee side, which I think makes up around 10 to 15% of my genetic makeup. And unfortunately, I never really got to know my Cherokee or Italian roots because my biological grandfather on my mom's side, who's Cherokee and was actually practiced many of the customs and belonged to a tribe for a period of time. He died pretty early, unfortunately. I didn't really get to totally understand that side of my genetic makeup. And on my Italian side, everyone there is very disconnected from their roots because my grandfather actually immigrated to this nation from Sicily, trying to escape from the mafia, and just over the decades, they lost touch with their roots. However, for a brief period of time during my childhood, I was very exposed to my Mexican roots because my grandfather tried his best to stay in touch with those and expose me to it a lot. And it definitely stuck because I was a child back then, and around that age, the things you experience kind of stick with you forever. I was exposed to my Mexican heritage mainly through visits I took to my grandfather's house, because his house was decorated in Spanish-influenced and Mexican-influenced art and decorations, such as different baskets and paintings and sculptures, basically every form of art that is able to be a decoration. He had a Mexican or Spanish-influenced one at his home. And in addition to that, he'd also throw parties with Mexican food there and mariachi bands playing as well. And I was exposed to this for a decent chunk of my life, at least until I was about 10 or 11. But unfortunately, what happened was my dad and my grandfather had a very estranged relationship for their entire life, which was finally severed completely when my grandfather, who worked for my dad, ended up trying to sue him for everything that he had in order to gain more retirement money. And to this day, we aren't able to forgive him for that. And as an unintended consequence of that, I pretty much lost touch with that whole side of the family and my Mexican roots. And instead, I was exposed to mainly Americanized and Anglican culture that my mother's adopted side and my father participated in. And overall, I don't really long for the past or wish anything changed there because I can't forgive what he did. To me, it just kind of is what it is. And sometimes I am curious about what would happen if I was able to be continually exposed to that throughout my entire life, but again, I can't really change the past. However, I have been able to learn some information about the history of the Mexican side of my family, or actually, more specifically, the Tejano side of my family. During most of my dad's life, he was told very fantastical tales about are the Vasquez ancestry, such as they're like a Vasquez ancestor riding with Pancho Villa and other stories such as that. Except when he looked into it, he found out that a lot of those stories are not true at all. And the truth is that our earliest ancestor we could trace back was a banjo-playing Tejano who lived along the San Antonio River on a ranch, and he ended up becoming a U.S. citizen when Texas was annexed. And over decades and generations, the Vasquezes moved north up to California and eventually started losing touch with their Tejano roots. And in this class, I was able to explore more of the history and culture of the Tejanos, and I learned that they're actually a very persistent people, because even in the face of a Spanish rule or becoming a minority in their own land, because of the American migrants coming in, they were still able to make a very unique culture that involved cultural facets such as music, and the music is actually pretty well known today. And with artists such as Selena and Jesse Ponce, who is not as well known, but very important in the genre anyway, because he was able to bring Tejano cultural values to other Tejanos that migrated up in Ohio. Even though the true history of my Tejano heritage isn't as exciting as what my dad was told growing up, I still am very happy to have that be a part of my heritage, and find that to be even more interesting than the fantastical tales of Vasquez's writing with Pancho Villa, because it feels good to know that I'm at least somewhat connected to a cultural group that has been able to persist and stay alive for so long, even against overwhelming odds such as the massive migration into Texas and even the annexation. Well, this was my personal final video for GRI 201. And overall, it was a great class, and I would highly recommend pretty much every student to take it, because I feel like it's very important, especially in the racial times we're living in right now. Alright, thanks for a great class, Jody.